What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host Nathan, and today we're checking out the last of the Pacific trucks in the game of SnowRunner. This vehicle actually has a lot of comparisons between the Pacific P16 and the P12 as well, and you'll see those throughout the video. It's actually a smaller truck, but it still packs a punch as well. So without further ado, here is the Pacific P512 PF. Hope you guys really enjoy this. If you really like the channel and its content, please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and please share the video as well. So let's get into this. Roll the tape. The P512 PF is the newest addition to the Pacific Company's presence on SnowRunner. While still being dwarfed in size compared to its siblings, the P12 and the P16, the 512 is still rather large. With its reduced size, it's somewhat more agile and can handle more roles than its brothers. The P512 has some really large red flags that drivers just have to handle, but also it boasts some really good Pacific Fleet traits. So before we dive into all those, let's look at some base stats. The Pacific P512 PF is classified as a heavy truck. It weighs 12.7 tons. In its stock configuration, it has a power to weight of A+, a durability of A-, fuel consumption B-, fuel capacity is 53 gallons. It comes with a stock suspension. Its tires also come stock with a 51-inch off-road tire. It does not have all-wheel drive, and its stiff lock is capable. Alright, let's dive into the pros and cons of the Pacific P512 PF. And like usual, bad news first. So, coming in at the number one downside, no all-wheel drive. Upon finding the 512 in a bog on Black Badger Lake, after recovery back to the garage, drivers find out there just isn't an option for all-wheel drive. Like its brother, the P16, the P512 is somewhat hamstrung with this downside. Objectively, all-wheel drive in SnowRunner adds value to vehicles' performance. In the new Phase 4 maps, vehicles that do not have all-wheel drive tend to struggle. That lack of all wheels spinning on super tough terrain is really frustrating, and ultimately it leads to grabbing a more capable vehicle. Unfortunately, the only heavy class vehicles without this upgrade is the P16 and our truck, the P512. Downside number 2, steering. The lack of all-wheel drive affects more things on our list, and steering is definitely one of them. While I don't think the turning circle is bad, the rear axle's power push during turns will cause steering to suffer. All-wheel drive is great because it provides power in the turning direction to physically help pull the vehicle through the turn. In my test, I found that a full steering input was actually late to bite into the surface until I let off the power. So if you can afford to pull power in a turn, it will help somewhat. Through further testing, steering inputs in deep areas add resistance against forward progress, as explained in my P16 review. I know I'm really beating up on the lack of all-wheel drive, I know, but just wait till our next downside. Downside number 3, small fuel tank and average economy. Not having all-wheel drive has advantages in fuel savings, but the P512 suffers from a small 53-gallon fuel tank and a fuel economy that trends in the average range. In lighter areas, it doesn't burn much fuel, but under heavy loads, it can start to run through fuel pretty well. Just hauling cargo on 50% highways between warehouses and Black Badger Lake burned enough fuel on 2 trips that warranted a fuel stop. It's well known that I scrutinize this category pretty harshly, but this downside should be on everybody's list. Coming in at downside number 4, no race suspension. I feel this one perhaps could have been left out of the downsides list, but this option to have a race suspension would be nice. However, a raised kit elevates the vehicle's center of gravity away from the ground, reducing stability. The Pacific doesn't sit low, and actually has a decent ground clearance without the raised kit. Like its sibling, the P16, SnowRunner has yet to offer this upgrade. A race suspension would help in boggy areas, but I don't think it would be beneficial on rocky surfaces which jar the vehicle around. Overall, I don't think this downside is a deal breaker due to the center of gravity issues. Downside number 5, balance. I mentioned the center of gravity on the last downside, but to expound on it further, the number 5 downside can be very irritating. First, the P512 seems to be balanced more toward the front end away from its main driving force. It also isn't too heavy, but it's also not a light vehicle as well. Second, the vehicle sometimes feels as if it's a tricycle with its large, wide rear axles and its normal width front axles. In bumpy areas, I've gone up on 2 wheels a few times, prompting a quick winch to save me from tipping. And third, overall, its balance isn't enough to say it's tippy, but its balance seems average at best. With a raised kit, this vehicle would be below average when it comes to stability. If you're going slow, it shouldn't be too much of an issue, but just be careful at higher speeds. Downside number 6, terrain limitations and wheel spin. The P512 is going to struggle greatly on later maps in the game. It did do well in Wisconsin, but the Amur maps are going to be tough. Not having that all-wheel drive option will limit its grip on rocky surfaces and terrain. In short, it just needs more axles with power. The vehicle will also tend to wheel spin quite a bit due to power, but situational awareness will stop you from digging yourself into a trench. Downside number 7, endgame DLC vehicle. While some people might not believe this is a downside, I would have loved to use this truck during my Michigan campaign. A lot of added DLC trucks nowadays you can use right at the start of the game, but the Pacific is just not one of them. It just takes so long to acquire this vehicle if you play the game in map order. By the time you get it, your only experience with it is in Wisconsin really, and Amur if you really dare to use it there. To me, it's a downside due to getting it so late in the game. And finally, coming in at our number 8 downside, no chained option. To be short, chains are becoming needed more and more throughout the SnowRunner journey. The lack of chained option here will just cause the Pacific to struggle on icy rocks and driving surfaces. Okay, enough of the bad stuff, let's get to the good news now. Here are the pros for the Pacific P512 PF. Upside number 1, power. As we've seen so far, the Pacific shares some downsides with its brother the P16, but it also shares some really good things as well. The first shared upside is the power, and I mean the Westline V12 engine. The ANK Mark 38, the Dairy Longhorn 3194, the P12, and the already noted P16 all share this powerful engine. Being that the P512 is the second lightest heavy truck, its power to weight is usually around S or S plus rating depending on add-ons. As we know, the vehicles listed carry heavy loads, and the P512 is not excluded from the list. Upside number 2, wheels. No longer are the revered super off-road tires exclusive to the P16 and the Cat 770G. These tires are now scaled down to 51 inches, and they are the only option for the P512, but what an option it is. The stats for this special off-road tire are just far greater than the mud tire options on most vehicles. As mentioned in my P16 video, these tires can be trusted to dredge through deep mud. Just be aware of turn inputs like we talked about on that review as well. Upside number 3, engageable diff lock. The P512 seems to be taking after its big brother more and more as we make our way through this list. However, instead of being identical here with the always-on diff lock, it has the engageable feature. While I do wish this was an always-on option, the engageable makes such a difference when you activate it. It really is a great feature to have with our number 2 upside, but just be aware that you need to be in low gear to have it on. Upside number 4, snorkel. To be very brief, it can equip 2 duckhead snorkels like the Twin Steer, and it just adds to its water crossing ability. Being able to plunge into water without drowning is always a good thing. Upside number 5, utility. It's well known that the Pacific fleet just doesn't have a lot to offer when it comes to utility, but the P512 breaks the mold in that department. It basically can equip every add-on that you would ever need. And I must also mention that it can use a small crane, a sideboard bed, and also attach a hitch trailer as well. Something really neat is that it's one of the only vehicles that the cabin protector doesn't shove the sideboard bed farther aft. It's pretty cool. Very few vehicles in the game of SnowRunner can equip the logging crane and the long log attachment at once, but the Pacific has this capability just like the P12. Lastly, like the P12, its spare tire attachment is behind the cab, and it still can work with some attachments, giving you more survivability. And finally, coming in at our number 6 upside, it's a smaller, more agile P16. Throughout this whole review, we've noticed similarities between the P512 and the P16. It's basically a shrunken P16 with more utility and also more agility. For fans of the P16, this vehicle might seem really appealing. There are some places that the P16 just cannot go due to its wide nature, but the smaller 512 can get through those narrow passes and roads. So moving on to my personal ratings for this truck. For power, I gave it a 4 due to the shared Westline V12 providing S to S plus power to weight. For terrain navigation, I felt that a 3 was quite generous. Its tires helped the score, but the lack of all-wheel drive decreased it. That upgrade would probably have boosted it to a 5. Due to the P512 not having all-wheel drive and its diff lock feature being engageable, this truck takes some finessing to drive it effectively. New drivers would struggle somewhat, so I felt that a below-average score sufficed. For aesthetics, I love the way it looks. It kinda reminds me of a beefier white western star with an added duck head snorkel. It's got that blue collar look, so I like it a lot. Stability is average, earning the 3 because although I don't feel it's tippy, it's not stable enough to merit above its current rating. Like the Azov 5319, it has the second smallest fuel tank in the game. It also has an average fuel consumption. I gave it a 2 because its economy is average at best and its tank is super small. Because the P512 has greater utility than its brothers and can basically use everything, I think a 5 is appropriate. Decent weight, amazing tires, and an engageable diff lock all work together to carry this to a rating of 4. Yet again, if it had chain tires and an all-wheel drive unit, I think a 5 would be a no-brainer. So in conclusion, the Pacific P512 PF is a challenge to play, but it's also quite rewarding to play with its ability. It's honestly what I call a pocket P16. It shares a ton of features with the P16 and it has its own additions. The 512 is hamstrung by its fuel tank capacity, average fuel burn, lack of all-wheel drive, and no chain tires, but those things can be managed as well by good planning. However, it's just hard to justify using it in Phase 4 due to all those things we just listed. I would have loved to have found this vehicle on Smithfield Dam or any other Michigan map. I feel we exalt the P16 because it was an early game vehicle with great ability. The P512 would also be respected more if it was acquired earlier in the game, giving drivers a good option. It's just sad that as soon as the truck is introduced to the game, the next map update almost makes it unusable in some situations. Personally, I love the truck. I use it and I will continue to use it, but I also pick and choose what terrain to attack it with to be most effective. So, try it out and let me know what you think. I hope this review gave you a fresh new perspective of the Pacific P512 PF. Please smash the like button. Definitely share this video with someone who is struggling with the game, and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any future content. I hope you all have a wonderful day, God bless, and stay upright.